Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we are with Prosper Tomebound, a casual version of the deck sent to us by Lostin. Lostin says that their deck's main theme is to kill opponents with cards like Marionette Master, Reckless Fireweaver, and Cut to Ribbons. It also has a sub-theme of exiling opponents' cards, and they'd like to have interaction and an improved mana base. They also want a good amount of impulse draw, and they're having a difficult time having a good balance in their deck. They say, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel as my deck has too much gas. The cards in the sideboard I was thinking of putting in, but I didn't know what to cut or add. They say their budget for the deck is for each card to be under $10, and it's meant to be casual. We can definitely work within those means. And though I have some additions and some things to look at, especially when we talk about mana base and stuff like that, I think the deck has a much more direct issue we need to kind of address. But before we get to that, this is a great time to remind you that if you would like your own deck to be featured on this show, you can send me your deck list in the video description below. And if you'd like your deck to be the next deck I work on, please take note in the description down below, a link to do just that. Finally, if you'd like to take a look at this Prosper deck before or during the video or after the video, whenever you want, it'll always be here in the video description. So before we go any further, let's remind ourselves, who is Prosper Tomebound and what do they do? And why are they such a popular commander? Well, Prosper Tomebound is a 4-mana Tiefling Warlock, 1/4 in red-black colors, Death Touch, and has 2 incredibly powerful abilities. The first one is at the beginning of your end step, you exile the top card of your library, and you can play that card until the end of your next turn. And the other ability is whenever you play a card from exile, create a treasure token. I feel like they were trying to perfect their idea of 4-mana commanders that draw you a card at a certain point in commanders, and Prosper is very close to the perfect version of that. The ability to draw cards so freely because their impulsive draw is really, really strong, and the bonus that as you cast these spells, you get mana is even stronger. So let's take a look at the deck. And the deck is a pretty good start for a casual Prosper deck. However, and this is what I alluded to earlier, there is a rather large, I would say, speed bump in this deck's development, mainly with how it works with Prosper. And you can see it as we scroll down to our mana curve. Our mana curve isn't so much of a curve as much as it's a tower. 2 mana is the highest, which, as I said in the previous video, is ideal, but 3 and 4 mana are also really, really high. And as longtime viewers of the channel, as I don't even know how long the channel's been around, but our 4 mana drop is the same mana cost as our commander, Prosper. And so this is a bit of a tough zone to be playing in, because all of these cards, which are quite a few, counting really quickly, at least 15 cards, 14 and our commander, are at 4 mana. And that's tough, because not only, one, do they compete with Prosper, who is an incredibly powerful card, which should always be the first thing we cast once we have 4 mana, but they also directly negatively work with Prosper's abilities. Prosper is incredibly powerful when you can cast the cards off of the top. When you are drawing an extra, let me give you a scenario. When you are drawing an extra card per turn, how many spells should you be casting per turn? Because the answer has to be more than 1, because otherwise you're going to keep, like, don't get me wrong, you're going to be in a situation you can play a land, cast a spell, play a land, cast a spell, and you'll be at neutral, but that neutral isn't going to mean anything, right? Because those extra cards will just rot in your hand. The goal, of course, is to be casting multiple spells a turn, especially when Prosper's main caveat is that his spells or his cards that are exiled with Mystic Arcanum, they stay only for the turn. So after the end of your next turn, they are gone forever. If you haven't cast them, you do not get, it's as if you didn't draw the card. In addition, if you didn't play the card, you don't get the treasure. And here we go, we've gotten the problem. We need to be able to play the cards off of Prosper and play the other cards from our hand. Otherwise, we might as well not be drawing this many cards because the rest of the cards are just going to rot. And for that in mind, my main goal in this deck assist video is to talk about mana curve and specifically talk about this 4 mana slot. And I'll tell you exactly what we're going to do. I'm going to have two kinds of additions. The first kind of additions is a bunch of 1 mana cards that I just think generally would improve the deck and be easier to cast off the top with Prosper. And then the second thing we're going to do is I'm just going to name, I'm looking at this, maybe 6, maybe 7 cards that do similar things. They trigger Prosper, they do the impulsive draw, but they are not 4 mana. And that's going to be the goal. So I know there's a lot of things that you've let us know that you want to change in the deck, but we're going to have to do these one at a time. Personally, you said things about removal and stuff. I think the removal is rather good. And I think the land base is rather good. Perhaps, you know, one might say it's a bit high, but when our main way of ramping is all of the card draw we're going to have, 39 lands is feasible. In addition, like, I don't think the problem is the removal. You have good removal, and I will suggest 1 or 2 extra cards. The problem is our deck is crammed, as you put it, with gas. Those specifically cards that either impulsively draw or exile cards permanently that we can cast to use Prosper. I want you to imagine a situation as well. Outpost Siege, which is a card we will talk about of taking it out in a second, but just as an example of a card whose Khan's ability does the Prosper ability, right? Exiles a top card, impulsively draws, and you have it for the turn. Well, what happens when you have Outpost Siege and you have Prosper? And the cards you exile are 3 to 4 mana each. Well, you're just burning cards off the top of your deck. This is definitely a problem with too much gas, but the thing is, the gas would be fine if it was in your hand, but it's not. So let's start by taking a look at our 4 mana cards and start cutting from there. And honestly, we're going to try to cut as many of these cards as possible. And then if I feel we can cut a few from 3 quickly, we will as well. But let's start from the top to the bottom. Chaos Channeler is a 4/3 that on attack can impulse draw. This is nice and simple, and unfortunately it is too clunky. Chaos Channeler needs to enter the battlefield and then it needs to attack. This is fine at a casual level, but because it's 4 mana, I don't think it belongs here. I would rather a lower mana creature that always exiles just the top card, which I think we have here with Lelia, who does that and is an infinitely better card, right? With haste and on attack. So why are we keeping Chaos Channeler? Yes, I get the idea that you have pretty much a 50% chance to get 2 cards, but it's not ideal. It's really clunky. Let's cut that nice and easily. Gonti is a great card, no problem here. I'm perfectly fine with Gonti because you're not in a rush to play Gonti, and when you play Gonti, you get to keep the card permanently, something I really like. Something we're not going to talk about this draft, but Gonti also works with Feign Death effects particularly well, which are particularly good with Prosper because Prosper attracts, well, lightning like a lightning rod, let's say. Let's see what's next. I should be clicking these, I'm sorry. Grim Hurling is interesting. Grim Hurling is a creature that is meant to give us treasure tokens on creatures hitting our opponents. But here's the thing. We're not really a combat-oriented build. We have very few creatures that are lower than this mana. Not all of them can successfully attack. In fact, a lot of them are particularly weak. And so we also, in order to use Grim Hireling, you want to hit as many players at once, right? You want to hit all 3 of your opponents all at once to get 6 treasure tokens. But we need evasion, we need flyers, we need an unending torrent of tokens to get this going. And so Grim Hireling just kind of doesn't feel like it belongs here. And you already have over here on the side that you were considering Professional Facebreaker, and I would suggest that is just better. If nothing else, it's not at 4 mana. It does the same thing. It's half the number of treasure tokens. It comes with an impulsive draw on itself. I think you'll be a lot happier with the Professional Facebreaker. So cut the Hireling for sure. Hidetsugu, Devouring Chaos, is also, unfortunately, just a bit too clunky for the mana cost. Because we have to remember, we're using this for his second ability, which means we are paying 7 mana for that first impulsive draw. Don't get me wrong, the ability for Hidetsugu to then, lightning bolt whatever you want due to the whatever's on the top is cool, but also remember you have 39 lands, and the odds of flipping a land are rather high, and it is just not worth the mana cost with that risk. So I think Hidetsugu is an easy cut. Prosper is our commander. Stormkiln Artist is very, very strong, so we will keep that for sure. Tectonic Giant as well. I'm a little less keen on it, but I do rather like the card, so I'm happy to leave it in here. I wish it had an Enter the Battlefield ability, but it doesn't. We work with what we have. Wild Mage Sorcerer is a little tricky. I do like the idea of them, but the 4 mana is kind of clunky, and the fact that a lot of the time you're not going to get good cascades out of it, right? You need to, so I think the ideal situation would be you play Prosper, you wait a turn, you play a land, you cast Wild Mage Sorcerer, and then you hope to immediately cast Prosper's exiled card, right? But if you notice, you only have 1 additional mana. So that's kind of hard, because a cascade at 1 does nothing. So let's think about it again. Wild Mage Sorcerer is now, let's imagine it as if it's 5 mana. So you untap, you play Wild Mage Sorcerer, you have 2 mana open this time, right? Because you have an additional mana that we're factoring in. And you can cast the card from Prosper for 2 mana and get a free 1 mana spell. Do you see the amount of mana we need to be feeding into this to use this card immediately? While, kind of risking both Prosper and this creature to removal? With that in mind, I think... Oh yeah, and sorry, all of this is also dependent that the card on top of your deck is also 2 mana or less, right? Or like 3 mana or something low, and not just, one of your 4 mana cards. All of this kind of, for me, balances it out that I don't like Wild Mage Sorcerer, because I want to use the ability immediately, and to get a reliable hit, I want to cast a 4 mana spell. In order to do that, I need 8 mana total to cast Wild Mage Sorcerer and to cast this. I don't know. I'm not too impressed, especially with how brittle this creature is. Once again, if it wasn't 4 mana, I'd be even easier on it, but I'm not too impressed. Cut to Ribbons is not 4 mana, despite what it says here, so we can ignore it. Disrupt Decorum is a really fun card, but fundamentally doesn't work well in a deck like this. I'm going to give you another goad option when I go to additions, but this is just not going to have the effect that you want. Disrupt Decorum is really good in decks that can repeatedly cast it or take advantage of the chaos of it. And one of the ways you do that is by purposely giving your opponents cards to attack each other with. And that's just not this deck. So as fun as it is, and I would keep this card, it is unfortunately just not where it's at right now. Ignite the Future, likewise, once again, 4 mana for kind of impulsive draw. I do like the flashback of it, I won't lie, but at the moment we don't have enough ways to discard it into our graveyard and then generate 8 mana. So for me, it's an easy cut, and maybe a different build of it, we can find something that would work. Looking at, did I miss Throes of Chaos? I did. Throes of Chaos is really interesting. I do like this card, but once again, I would like a way to toss this into our graveyard. Otherwise, that first cast is just okay. And the other thing that's kind of tricky about this card is that once we get to the point, so we have Prosper out, we are basically overpaying for cards to get a treasure back, right? We cast this, we cast 4, and at best we get a 3 mana card. So we then get a 3 mana card and we get a treasure. We're back to neutral, technically. Okay, what if we think about it like this? What if Throes of Chaos flips a 2 mana spell? Well, then we're actually down a mana because we've overpaid for a 2 mana card and only gotten 1 treasure back. Then imagine this is in our graveyard. To do this repeatedly, we have to keep discarding lands. So we are also giving up a land. Now, technically, when we cast Throes of Chaos, we're giving up a card, so maybe that's not so bad. Okay, I'll leave that as neutral. That's fine. So Throes of Chaos is just kind of okay, as long as the cards you flip are 3 mana. But as we reduce the mana cost of the deck, which we should, you know, these cards are going to get worse. Furthermore, obviously flipping into removal when there's nothing to remove, or certain other situational cards, you're going to be a little sadder about when you use Throes of Chaos. So though a fun chaotic card it is, I just don't know if it's the card that we want. We have even up here a 5 mana cascade card, Bituminous. I'm the Blast, let's just say, which I like far more, despite the fact that it's more mana. It's instant speed, it destroys a creature, you're really happy with this, where Throes of Chaos is a combo enabler and not a value piece. So I think I would cut that as well. Hurl Through Hell makes me giggle as a card because I didn't know Hell existed in D&D, and now I know. I think this is really clunky, right? The idea is really cool. You exile a creature and you get to cast that creature. But I think there's just a lot of situations where you're just going to use it as an exile. And if that's the case, you could probably get that effect at 3 mana or just removal at 3 mana. You know, you're going to be just happier with it instead of casting 4 mana for a card you just don't have the means or interest to cast. For example, Hurl Through Hell will never work on commanders, right? They'll always just put it back in the command zone. That's that. It will also be kind of useless against creatures that are like 4 or higher mana because you're not holding up 8 mana to cast Hurl Through Hell, right? I will say, for what it's worth, I thought it was the same turn. You do have 2 turns. Even then, I think some cards you're just not going to hit. I don't particularly like this card. Maybe you've had some really good plays with this card and want to keep it. I'll leave that one up to you. Wand of Wander is very much so like, yeah. This is very much so like Chaos Channeler, and also Hidetsugu, where we have little control, you know, over what gets flipped. We can get good flips or we can get bad flips. Then we have very little control over how many of the cards that we roll, you know, that we actually get to cast. So I personally will always assume I'm just getting 1 and hope to get at least 1 playable card. But the final thing is that it's an additional 4 mana to do this every single time, right? And that's expensive. That's not free. This isn't the worst. I do particularly like it because I think it is a strong card, especially if you're hoping to get the X's 2. But even with that in mind, I'm not too impressed by it. I think this deck needs to, like, it can play it, but you need to generate a lot of mana for Wand of Wander to just, you know, actually have some meaningful effects on the gameplay. So I don't like it, but I wouldn't push too hard if you wanted to keep it. And the last one is Outpost Siege, which I think you can just flat out cut. It just kind of interferes with our commander. It's just a worse version of our commander. It feels good to have another version of this effect, but it's too much. I don't think you want it. So I think you'd be happy to cut it. Looking at 3, I'm going to go very, very quickly. That Art of Zorn is so great. Let's see. Commander Sphere and Unstable Obelisk should be just any 2-mana artifacts. Let's see, you have Rakdos Signet, you have Talisman of Indulgence, you have Mind Stone. Maybe you already have enough. Maybe you just don't need to play another one. I think you could cut those pretty easily. Though I was talking about trying to cast big spells, they are really clunky. They're 3 mana. Unstable Obelisk doesn't have other text. I know it feels like it does. I know we all look at Unstable Obelisk and go, well, 7 mana, destroy target permanent, lets us destroy enchantments really well, which is something the colors, struggle with. You will never use that ability. I have yet to see anyone ever use that ability. It just doesn't come up. No one has enough mana to hold up to use this, and you will always, because of Prosper, have better plays to do. So I would cut those two very easily. All right. Let's leave it at those. I really don't like this creature, but that's not what we're here for. Let's see if there's anything else. Dream Pillager, Fisis, Reckless Endeavor. Reckless Endeavor doesn't impress me. What's it, 8? Okay, another one. Reckless Endeavor, I think, is just too much mana. 7 mana at a chance to destroy some creatures is really, really bad. And considering the idea that maybe you'll draw, like, what if you roll like a 6 and a 2 and you're using this as a board clear, right? This doesn't feel good getting 2 treasures, but that's the choice you have to take, right? It feels cool doing 2 damage to everything and getting 6 treasures, but that's also too much mana. Like, I think Brass's Bounty gives you a treasure for each land you control, and that's like 6 or 7 mana, like 6 mana, and guarantees like 6 treasures. So this feels really, really clunky, even though I think it's a nice nod to Bilbo, except for that poor person is gone. And then Fevered Suspicion. Fevered Suspicion is, if this is the strongest, like your highest mana spell in the deck, then I think it's fine. You're going to feel so bad when Prosper flips this and you don't have 8 mana, though. Actually, you're going to feel really bad when you flip this and you have 8 mana because you can't rebound it if you don't cast it from your hand. Interesting, I didn't think about that. With that in mind, I'm not too keen on this. I think I would easily cut this, but I'll leave that up to you. It is a fun, flashy card. And the ceiling is rather high. The fact that it has to be a non-land card really, really helps. And if you can cast it from your hand, that's really, really good. But the fact that the rebound doesn't work with Prosper, the fact that it's 8 mana, all of these make me a little less interested in it. So I'll leave it to you. All right. Let's see how we're doing on time. We are making good time. Let's go to my additions. So as I said before, I'm going to give additions in 2 kind of columns. A third one because I want to give some card draw, which I'll probably start with. But the 2 main columns are 1 mana spells that you can use and happily flip off of Prosper, and a few non-4 mana cards to make up for the impulse draw that I just suggested that you cut. So let's start with the draw. I just, nice and easy, wanted to just suggest Night's Whisper and Read the Bones. Both of these are low mana cards that you can cast off of Prosper. They're cards that help you set up for other turns. They are not impulse draw, so all of a sudden you get to keep the cards you draw. Amazing. And so with that in mind, I think these will be really nice additions. Very cheap. You'll be very happy. All right, let's start with the 1 mana cards. A card I note that you have to the side is Disciple of the Vault. I see no reason for you not to play it. It is a 1 mana card that will deal 1 damage every time you sacrifice a treasure. It's not ideal, but as you lean further and further into treasure, which is something you probably will do as we build the deck further, Disciple of the Vault will get better and better. Nice and easy. I think you'll be really happy. Another card that I think belongs here pretty easily is Kaya's Ghost Form. Kaya's Ghost Form is a fantastic card that you can use it to just enchant Prosper, and once Prosper is enchanted with it, it becomes incredibly difficult to get rid of him. You have to bounce him to not get him back on the battlefield. Nice and easy. No one's going to be too mad. I mean, you're not going to be too mad. Your opponents might not like it, but it's a nice 1 mana spell. Another 1 mana spell is Wayfarer's Bauble. Wayfarer's Bauble is the ramp that you can get to that puts lands into play that is hard to find outside of green. So a nice easy inclusion, 1 mana, you can play it, and then when you have extra mana you can crack it, or early game you can play it and crack it right away to ramp. Very nice. Speaking of a little bit of ramp, I have Strike It Rich. I think you'd be generally happy to cast Strike It Rich. It works with your treasure tokens. It works with a flashback here and there. Now, generally, this is a combo card or a setup card. I'm thinking it more of as a setup card here, where if you cast it out of exile, you're going to be really, really happy because you've gone up in mana while like working with some other cards you might have. But also, occasionally, just being able to flashback this to prepare for another turn when you have nothing you're really doing isn't a bad call. So this is a card I do tend to like in a deck like this. Another version of Strike It Rich is Impulsive Pilferer, where when it dies, you get a treasure token. So this works as an early 1 mana cast, really nice defensive creature, or a creature that can be a little aggressive. And then after he's dead, you can use the Encore to trade this card for 3 treasures guaranteed, which is rather, rather good. Speaking of a card that helps us put these cards into the graveyard, we have Faithless Looting. This was something that I was a little surprised wasn't in here, but is very, very accessible to you. Faithless Looting is a very, very good card. Helps you put some of these cards into your graveyard that you want in your graveyard, and has the benefit that when you cast it from exile, you're not down a card, which is generally the downside of casting it from hand. So that's really, really nice. You can flashback it later. You're going to be very happy with that. Another thing to do with recursion would be Vat of Rebirth. I didn't realize this, but Vat of Rebirth gets oil counters when artifacts go into the graveyard, which is your treasures, which makes this card considerably stronger than I thought it initially was. And with that in mind, I think it's a very easy inclusion here because you have a lot of creatures that you'd like to get back. Play it off of Prosper or any other impulse draw for 1 mana, keep it around, and as you do the thing you want to do in your deck, this will be ready to crack faster than you know it. And the funny thing is, it's not even crack because you don't lose the Vat when you reanimate. You can just keep going. I think this is deceptively a very, very strong card in the right deck, and I think this is one of those decks. Finally, 2 more generic 1 mana cards. Lightning Bolt, always good. I will never... If I don't suggest Lightning Bolt, I have forgotten to suggest Lightning Bolt, is a nice little way of looking at it. Lightning Bolts you'll be happy to have a little more removal, and it's just really easy to cast off Prosper, so you'll be happy. And finally, Dark Ritual. Dark Ritual is a card that has a bit of a reputation at times as also being a bit of a combo card, but you're really happy to cast either off of Prosper, or this enables a turn 2 Prosper, where you go Mountain, then you go Swamp, cast Dark Ritual, cast Prosper. Very, very happy to do so. Prosper is very, very strong the earlier he comes out, and Dark Ritual just enables that to happen. And later in game, it lets you play multiple spells a turn, or some kind of mix of a really strong spell that's otherwise harder to cast. All right, let's look at some cards that work with or have to do with exile. Hoarding Broodlord is a card that's rather cheap that I think is pretty good in your deck. I don't know how much you'll end up convoking. I don't think you're attacking with Prosper, so that makes Hoarding Broodlord at least 6 mana. But if you can convoke 1 or 2 creatures after that, turning this from 8 mana to like 6 or 5, this is a very, very good creature. The fact that it immediately tutors, I think you had said, I could have been wrong here. Let's see what you said about tutors. I think you may have said you didn't want any. Do not add tutors or infinite combos. Well, I'm still going to suggest this because this is particularly a high mana tutor. I don't think anyone will ever be mad that you use this spell. It's like saying that diabolic tutor is too strong, but I'll leave it up to you. The main thing I like about this is it enables your spells from exile to have convoke, which I think is rather strong here. So in the end, I'll leave it to you because it does tutor, but I think it is a particularly strong one here. Looking at a few 3 mana options, Floran Scion, a card that I've always been impressed in and always surprised that I never see it around. It says, at post-combat main phase, you get to look through the amount of cards that equal to the damage one of your opponents, total damage your opponents have taken this turn, and then exile one of them, and then that's going to be the impulse draw. Now, I really like this because though it's just impulse draw 1, technically, the more damage you do, the more selection you get. So you can guarantee whatever you impulsively draw, you get to play. I really, really like that. Also, obviously, Floran as a 3/3 first strike has really good odds of getting in. And at that level of casual Magic, the chances of getting into one opponent are generally rather high, so you'll be pretty happy with the result. One that I think is a bit stronger is Bres Apprentice. Bres Apprentice comes in with a Thopter, even though the art has 2 Thopters in it. This makes me so mad. You get a single Thopter, and he has the ability that you sacrifice an artifact, and you either boost a creature or you impulsively draw. And as you have probably noted, Prosper makes artifacts when you impulsively draw. So Bres Apprentice is very much so there that when what you need is card draw and not mana, Bres Apprentice will continuously sacrifice the treasure you get off the playing the top card into the next impulsive draw. And I really, really like that personally. All right, at 2 mana, we have Faithless Salvaging. Now, this is an impulsive draw, but this is another Faithless Looting effect where you discard a card and draw a card, and I think that's rather strong. But the fact that it itself has Rebound allows you to get the Prosper trigger off the Rebound. Now, this is the same problem with the other Rebound card I pointed out, that it will not trigger off of Prosper, but I do not mind that as much because it is 2 mana and not 8 mana. So with that in mind, getting only half of Faithless Salvaging is not the worst situation after all. Then I've got, let's start with Cunning Rhetoric. Cunning Rhetoric is a card that I've wanted to work, but I haven't gotten to work in a while. And I think this is the kind of deck that you would like it. It's a 3-mana enchantment that says when opponents attack you, or planeswalkers you control, you don't impulsively draw, but you get to exile the top card of their library, and you can cast it whenever you want with any mana. Whenever, like with the rules of the card, of course. But what I like about this is that it has a nice little soft power to keep people from attacking you, as your opponents will be disincentivized to attack you. And trust me, this is a much better disincentivization than, like, I don't know, 1 damage to each for each creature they attack you with, because they don't know what's on top of their deck. This is a scary kind of thing that is like nebulous, that they might be losing the best card of their deck when they attack you. Meanwhile, eventually when they do have to attack you, you'll get a few extra cards this way, which I think is rather good. So definitely a card to try. Then, this is at 5 mana, but I think it's absolutely worth it, is Inspired Tinkering. Inspired Tinkering is 5 mana. You get to impulsively draw the top 3 for 2 turns, and then you get 3 treasure tokens. And if you're like, hey, Curse, that kind of sounds like Prosper. Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And Prosper's real good. So I'll let you decide how good Inspired Tinkering is. To put it straightforwardly, if I could draw 3 and create 3 treasure tokens, I would imagine I'd be paying more than 5 mana for it. So I think Inspired Tinkering is very, very good here. And you probably won't play all of them because maybe there's 2 lands, and you'll just be happy with the extra treasure. So I think this is a really easy slot in right away. And then finally, this isn't an impulsive draw, but I just think we're talking about goat at a certain point, and I think Bothersome Quasit is going to be very, very good in your deck. I think you have a lot of non-creature spells, and I think your ability to just go down your opponent's creatures is really, really important. You know, Disruptive Decorum is like this one-time big kind of shakeup, and then when the shakeup's over, everyone's going to gun for you as revenge. But Bothersome Quasit is just really, really good at creating sustained annoyance and pressure against your opponents, where they have to continue to deal with it, or they have to deal with the fact that they're continuously forced to make bad attacks or forced to pressure each other. and they can't really do much about it. It's also a very good attacker for what it's worth, as goaded creatures can't block, and it has menace. So by itself, it is quite a menace. And I think that's generally where I want to stop, you know, what we're working on the deck. I think there's a lot of cards you have in the sideboard location that I'd like to take a look at and go into a little deeper. Some of these are obviously cards that I've named, and some of these, like Torment of Hellfire, kind of break your budget a little bit, so I wonder if you already own it or you're just thinking of cards. But in the meantime, what I'll say in conclusion is right now, I think the first step of this deck is we need to get the mana base a little under control. 4 mana is, your 4 mana column is just way too high, and we can cut almost all of those cards and reduce the overall mana cost, which will be very, very useful for Prosper. After which we can start looking at other options. We can start looking at mana and the specific spells, keep it casual, but like reduce 3 mana a little bit, and see what we can do from there. But that's where I would start. And as for my additions, I would take a look through them. I would say the most important additions are our alternate impulsive draws that aren't at 4 mana. And then after, put in as many of those one mana cards that you deem necessary to fill out the rest of the cuts that you like to play. And I feel like a lot of them will improve Prosper's ability to cast cards off the top of the deck. And after that, I'd give the deck a bit of a go, and then we'll see how you're feeling about it and how we can improve it. Prosper has a very, very wide berth of the power level of the deck. And there's no reason that we can't have a casual deck that's still successful. Remember, successful is something we bring up every now and then, which is the idea that the deck basically doesn't lose to itself. It does what it means to do. And right now, I feel like with all of the high mana, that's kind of what's holding the deck back from feeling good and feeling like it can do what it means to do. We don't need to bring in giant, really strong tutor combos. We don't need to put infinite combos. We don't need to make, all of these like expensive cards. We can keep it low mana, but we can also make the deck very much so successful at what it wants to be. As always, if you would like to send me another draft of this deck, there is a link in the video description down below. That could be a draft of any deck as well if you want me to take a look at it. And if you would like that deck you send me to be the next deck I make a video on, well, there's a link in the video description there as well. Finally, if you could like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. The channel is always growing, and I'm always going to be happy to see more people visiting. All right, love to see Prosper, and good luck with the deck.